several centuries and a number of developments and twists and turns. You see what I'm saying? I'm looking at it from the historical unfolding point of view. I'm not saying that everything was there from the very beginning, but it could have been there in a protein form, in a seed form. But to get to the fruit took a little development, okay? So some of the comments of Raghib are extremely interesting and insightful. The man had a deep understanding of Quranic principles. But more important is how he understands aql in that context. He says in the bottom of this page, it is aql which is pointed to in the exalted utterance, God is the light of the heavens and the earth. Nur ala nur, right? Surat al-Nur. His light is like unto a lustrous niche, wherein is a lamp, the lamp inside a glass globe. And he means, the meaning of the light of the heavens and the earth is the illuminator, al-munawwir, which is aql. This is a philosophical ta'wil. Ibn Sina has very similar ta'wil of this verse. Right? But he, I think, is either a contemporary or slightly before Ibn Sina. The timing is not certain. Then he says, God sent two messengers to his creatures. The first of them is the interior hujjah, min al-batin. It is aql. The second is the exterior hujjah, exterior proof or decisive evidence, the Prophet himself. This statement we've heard already from Professor Patwani and others that attributed to one of the earlier imams. I think it does originate with the imams. It's not clear where it comes from. And then, etc. Then finally he says, at the end of this paragraph, he says, aql is a commander and religion is a reinforcement. Al-aql qa'id wa deen madad. And if aql did not exist, then religion would not continue to be maintained. While if religion did not exist, then aql would become bewildered. The combination of the two is nur ala nur. He is a very mainstream thinker. He's an unimpeachable Sunni authority, Raghib al-Isfahani, a great commentator on the Quran and a great moral ethicist. This cannot be looked at as some kind of strange and marginal idea that he offers here. It has to be seen as mainstream, which is why Ghazali was so much influenced by it. Anyway, so you can read for yourself the rest of it. If I go to the next page, here I turn to another text by Ghazali. I wanted to give you some of the text so you can taste for yourself, right? And my translations are my attempts. I don't claim them to be the best, but they're my best attempts. I can't do better than this. And some of them are very difficult, like this one here. This is a text which is, most people don't accept that it's written by Ghazali. It's called Al-Ma'arif al-Aqliya, the intellectual knowings or realizations. I don't know how to translate. It's very esoteric, but it's also very theological. It's a discussion about the notion of nutq, which is another word for reason, by the way, and what it means. If you read it carefully, you'll see that it's really Asharite. It supports Asharite theology perfectly. But it's very esoteric. It's written for, he says, for the advanced thinking seeker. Right? And in it, he begins with a very strange prologue. Another version of the Aql creation narrative. But this time, it's a very contrived one. If you read the Arabic, you would see how contrived it is. But I'll read a few lines and you can read the rest. When God, praised be He, wished to manifest His Jabarut, His imperious supremacy, by means of the volition, al-irada, befitting His essence, He originated a spiritual immaterial substance, simple, perceiving, perfect, perfecting. أبدع جوهرا روحانيا بسيطا مدركا كاملا مكملا. And He clarified and polished it like a mirror. Then He confronted it, put it face to face, قابله, with the light of His sublimity and beauty, من جلاله وجماله. So the divinity of the Creator, may His sublimity be exalted, reflected itself in the essential nature of this immaterial substance. فتصورت إلهية البارئ في ماهية جوهريته. Thereupon, this spiritual substance cognized the lordship of His originator, وعقل ربوبية مبديه, and thus he recognized the servantship of His essence. فعرف عبودية ذاته. The translation looks like garbage. I mean, it's hard to get the sense. Arabic, you might have more chance. But it's a very sophisticated, tortured way of, I believe Ghazali wrote this, imitating these hadiths, giving his own theology behind it, right? It's actually, it sounds like Ismaili theology. Now, if Ghazali was doing this, as my professor Herman Handel told me, if he wrote this, then he must have been Ismaili. Well, he was quite familiar with the Ismailis. He studied them. Some of his later writings, when he came back from his trip, as my professor Hussein Sakir has published some small books by Ghazali on this subject, he was in he wrote letters back and forth to Ismaili communities in Iran, even in late in life. He never rejected the Ismailis completely. He might have disagreed with them doctrinally, but he saw them as intellectually advanced people to some degree, who were concerned with issues that he was concerned with. They were also engaged with philosophic intellectuality and religion at the same time. Anyway, you can read it for yourself. It has an interesting creation theology in which the Avicennan theory of the rational soul and the moments of a manifestation of first intellect, where the first intellect recognizes himself, and then the recognition of himself projects a nafs, and because when the first intellect realizes that he was created by higher principle, that realization becomes nafs, right? Or another intellect, and so on and so forth, which is how Ibn Sina and Farabi before him had explained the manifestation of the universe through these moments of self-awareness, of intellection, and so on. And Ghazali comes down, he weaves this into him. When the intellect turns towards him, he has the iqbal and idbar, the facing forward and the facing back. This is a very major theme that now becomes part of the meditation on this hadith in all later thinkers. The iqbal and idbar, the facing forward and the facing away, become moments of manifestation or progression of cosmos and universe, or from intellect to soul. So he said, when he recognized his Lord and obeyed his command and took charge of the concealments of the divine determination, etc., then he turns towards him to receive for himself benefit, and turns away from him so as to impart benefit to others. أقبل عليه بالاستفادة وأدبر عنه بالإفادة. Very Plotinian, actually. Plotinus talked in several passages about the two faces of the soul, one of them which faces up towards the intellect, or the two faces of the intellect, one which faces up towards the higher or highest realm, and another which faces away. It's not clear whether Plotinus meant the progression of the intellect originally emanating from the unity and then returning to it, that facing. When you return to it, you're facing towards it. When you're emanating from it, you're facing away from it, because the emanation out of the unity leads to all of the rest of manifestation. And these are very interesting passages which have always excited the attention of the students of Neoplatonic thought. And some of these passages seem to have some subterranean link with these ideas here. So that the iqbal and idbar of aql become a means of cosmic explanation for Ghazali in this form to explain the manifestation of the created universe. The only thing about this hadith, of course, because from intellect, there is the word, al-kalima, and through the mingling with the word comes the soul, and through the manifestation of the soul comes the matter. So you have intellect, word, soul, matter. But that's the system at the heart of the Ikhwan al-Safa. It's there completely in agreement with this so-called hadith, that Ghazali is not pretending to be a hadith, but a means by which to project his interpretation or cosmic teaching in a way that would help set the stage for explaining what nutq and aql mean in this esoteric text of his. This text was published twice, once in Tunis and once in Damascus. I'm very intrigued by it. It's mentioned also by Jami as a genuine work by Ghazali. I talked to Afif Akiti, who's edited the Madmoon Bihi ala Ghairi Ahlihi, that which is withheld by those from. He believes it to be genuine. If this is true, then Ghazali was actually botany more open to philosophy and Ismailism than outwardly he would accept. Most people would say, no, that's not true, it can't be. He wasn't like that. I don't know. But it's a very interesting text, nevertheless. He comments on the hadith by Abu Ja'far al-Baqir. That's number 2 in the list, right? Istantakahu, right? He interrogated him, right? And he says interesting things about it, but you can see here at this later stage, and we're talking the 17th century, Isfahan, not too far from where we are right now, site of a very famous and powerful school of thinkers that influenced even today a number of countries, including Iran, India, Pakistan area, Turkey. They're thinking, and now in the West, the influence of the Isfahani school is still reverberating through the efforts devoted to propagating the teachings of Mullah Sadra. If you read this carefully, you'll see what he's done here is combine tasawwuf and philosophy with these hadith through a means of sharh of the hadith. He mediates his own intellectual synthesis, where the tasawwuf of Ibn Arabi and Suhrawardi and the philosophy of Ibn Sina and of others, and the basic narrative, theological, and bedrock teaching of the Ja'fari Shi'i are all combined together into a synthesis. And this is the kind of synthesis that most of the people who've come here to talk to you about, this is from their tradition that they're speaking out of. And this is what they take for granted. That's why they would say that aql is an ontological principle with a cosmological function, right? They would see that in the Quran itself. Other people might say, it's not quite that yet, but it could be, or it eventually did become. So in any case, you can take a look at it. He used Ayn al-Yaqeen, Haqq al-Yaqeen, Ilm al-Yaqeen, Al-Aql bil-Fi'l, Al-Aql al-Fa'al. It's all in here. It's all, and just a very brief summary. I took an excerpt. The next one, and he even refers to the hadith by Ja'far. He says, although this is what Baqir says, he interprets Baqir's hadith to refer to this philosophical spiritual intellect. He also mentions that aql is also said to be awwalu khalqin min al-ruhaniyin. And he goes on. I only have an excerpt. Then we have a famous Safavid era scholar, Muhammad Baqir al-Majlisi, who was not friendly to philosophy. Al-Mutafalsifa, he called it, the philosophists. Actually, he started off in life, he was very much beholden to Mullah Sadra and Mir Damad and was engaged with their ideas, but he abandoned their teachings and their ideas and took up hadith studies. He became the chief religious authority in 17th century Safavid Iran and enforced orthodoxy. He was against the Sufis. He was rather intolerant of other non-Muslim communities. And he was an indefatigable and tireless compiler of hadith. Bihar al-Anwar, for example, 110 volumes in the modern edition, greatest encyclopedia of Shiite hadith. And he has very important commentaries on them, so that these hadith that we quoted, the one from Ja'far as-Sadiq and one from, will you find extensive commentaries in the later books by, and this is one of their more important contributions. So he points out a number of things about this. And then also Mir Damad, and I quote Mir Damad here from his Ta'liq al-Kitab al-Kafi, and it's very interesting, and it fits into his own ideas about fitra, and the lessening and the intensifying of the innate faculty of intellection and intellectual perception, and how it is related to this notion of iqbal and idbar. And then finally, I point out that Imam Khomeini, in his Misbah al-Hidayah ila Khilafa wal-Wilaya, which is an early work of his in the Irfani vein, has a very interesting gloss on Mir Damad's comments, which are quite actually profound and penetrating, and showing that this tradition has been alive and maintained its intellectual activity and creativity until our own day. And so I don't quote it here, but I point out to it where, if you wanted to follow it up, you would see these are just a few of the high points that I cited and have translated. That there's a rich tradition that from the time that this hadith narration on the creation of aql took shape until its transformation into the first creation, already is a major series of transformations and developments over the first 4 or 5 centuries of Islam. But from that period on, at the hands of people like Al-Aghlab al-Isfahani and Al-Ghazali, and of course Miskawayh and Ibn Sina, we have not said anything about them, very important, and others, all the way down to people like Mir Damad and Mullah Sadra, and even opponents like Baqir al-Majlisi, whose comments on these hadiths are very interesting and important too. I might add, for example, that Mullah Sadra's Sharh of Usul al-Kafi, Professor Awani mentioned yesterday, even had the book in his hand. It's very interesting because he goes at great length to explain these hadiths about the creation of intelligence and the iqbal and idbar and their significance. In a way, he gives it a cosmic role in the same way that Ghazali does. But then at some point, after hundreds of pages, he pauses, and in one little paragraph, as if aside, if he makes a comment to this, he says, oh, you know what? Maybe all this interpretation may be not quite right, because actually the hadith might just be about taklif and about reward and punishment in terms of moral responsibility. And aql here should merely be understood as innate intelligence. But we prefer to see it in this way, which is a very elaborate spiritual, philosophical, cosmological explanation that goes on for pages and pages, which allows him to introduce his own philosophical structure and put it into the basis of this hadith. Say, hadith is saying what I say. What I teach is found in this hadith. So 1,300 years, 200 years ago, when this hadith was enunciated, already my philosophy was there originally and has now been unraveled and unfolded and expanded to the point where I can give it to you in great detail. But it's there in that hadith from the very beginning, according to Mullah Sadra. Of course, that way of looking is completely legitimate and valid. There's no one to say that they're wrong to see these ideas and these doctrines within the text of the Quran, within the early hadith of the Prophet and the family of the Prophet. As if somehow, if someone like me comes along and says, but if we see the isnad and analyze the text and compare the versions, we'd say that this is a Basr Qadri riwayah. They might say, Karim, you're being too literalistic. Open your eyes. Don't you see the implication? They may be right and I may be wrong. I apologize for having taken more time than I should have, and I hope I didn't bore you completely, but I thought it'd be useful for you to have another perspective on this type of subject. There's a lot more that can be done and that can be brought out from these kind of texts. These are some of the most significant and important texts in the Islamic tradition. Their significance for us today is of extreme importance because the very nature and the very validity of Islam as an intellectual, rational tradition is at stake. The forces that want to deny Islamic rationality and want to collapse Islamic intellectuality to a flat form of conformity and voluntarism and fideism, if I use Professor Awani's terms, are formidable, and efforts like ours are minuscule and marginal. I don't know the future, but I would say that Islamic intellectuality is not facing a very bright future. Sorry to say. Alhamdulillah alladhi hadana.